So we were riding through the small town of Ellaville, and I just so happened to see this giant statue as we were coming through. Confederate States of America, 1861, 1865. It looks like it's supposed to be a fountain and it's not working. Well, today we've traveled over to Columbus, Georgia. As you can see, I've got my good buddy Carolina Tony with me again today. Today we're gonna check out the Civil War Naval Museum. The very first thing you see when you walk up to the Naval Museum, they have these giant naval cannons that are sitting outside here. These are real cannons that were on board a ship at one point that have been repurposed. These things are amazing. Look how huge these things are. I could probably fit my head inside of that. This is what caught my eye from the road as we were driving by.
That's what I saw when I was riding by.
That's pretty cool. We're gonna see if we can get out there and check it out. This museum is all about the Navy and naval warfare. And I'm sure they have a lot of cool stuff in here. As a matter of fact, I know they have a lot of cool stuff in here. For example, this right here behind me. This magnificent structure here, this is the CSS Jackson. This was an ironclad warship during the Civil War. It was built in 1862. Man, this is amazing. Look how long it is. So the CSS Jackson actually never sailed. It was completed the very next day after it was completed. Union raiders came and took it over, and they burned it to the ground so the Confederate soldiers could not use it. It sat underwater for a long time until it was finally discovered. So I didn't notice this a minute ago, and I just realized it. This iron frame that sits above and below it is actually the scale of the ship. This would have been the top of the ironclad, including its smokestack there in the center. So what you see down here is the remainder of the bottom of it, and this would have been the top of the ironclad. That's really cool. As noted here, this anchor chain here is actually the anchor chain from the CSS Jackson. It was recovered along with this wreckage. You can tell the wood was underwater a long time, dry rotted, and all of these spikes holding it down were all made by hand. It's just an impressive feat because this thing is massive. And the reason all this is still here is, and it didn't get burned to the ground with the rest of it, is because all this would have been under the water. It wouldn't have been affected by the fire, which actually you can see fire damage on this wood. They were even able to recover its massive propeller. Look at that those giant bolts holding that propeller arm in. That's wild. You can imagine how long these propellers sit under the water. Definitely see its age here in the keel of the ship. To not be ever used, these propellers are in bad shape. Here's another one of the sides of the ship with fire damage, and man, amazing. This ship here in the case, this is the basic design of the CSS Jackson. The only difference is that it wouldn't have had this paddle wheel in the middle of it. Everything else on it would have looked just like that. Here's another boat. This is the CSS Chattahoochee. Wow, and this thing is just completely dismantled. It's just a mess. Artifacts from the Chattahoochee that were recovered. Here's a steam engine fixture. This ventilation grate come off of the Chattahoochee, and here's its anchor. And this is the rear rudder. This is what steered the ship. This large giant piece of wood and steel here. Look at this mural here on the wall. This is an ironclad here, which would be like the Jackson. That's really cool. The design of those ships, the ironclads, is really cool. It's kind of futuristic looking, actually. It almost like a modern day stealth boat. Almost looks like what a Confederate ironclad looked like. There's not a placard to tell about the USS Chattahoochee, but from what I know about it already, the USS Chattahoochee was christened in 1863. It was built for the river, and it served for quite a while. As the Union was taking over at the end of the war, Confederate soldiers purposely set it afire and dismantled it, and they purposely tore it up, or scuttled is the word I believe that they use, to keep it from falling into the hands of the Union. Obviously it was recovered and now it sits here. This is an amazing piece of history, both this one and the Jackson sitting right there. Here is a model of the CSS Chattahoochee. That's what this looked like before it was burnt down. Here's a grappling hook. All these artifacts were recovered from the wreckage of the Chattahoochee underwater. Boot socks over here on the left, swords, and here's a crew photo of crew members on board the Chattahoochee. This ship that you see here, this was its crew. Obviously none of these men are no longer living. This was Civil War, but it's kind of interesting that they have this, they have a photo of what it would have been like there, and then they have the wreckage of that exact ship right next to it. These flags that are littered across this wall all flew on board these naval ships. And then right next to it is this bell, which was rescued from the USS Water Witch, which Water Witch was very interesting. If you look here, this was a real picture of the USS Water Witch, and it was a paddle boat, but the paddle set off to the side. The steam engine would turn in the paddle, which pushed the boat, and I find that to be really interesting. Most paddle boats you see have the paddle at the rear, but they needed to be able to turn really fast, so they have really big rudders at the rear. That means the paddle couldn't be back there or get in the way of the rudders. This is the Water Witch, and you can see how I was talking about how the paddles are on both sides, and there is one on both sides to move the ship. They couldn't put it back here on the back because of the giant rudder. They have another good looking model here of the CSS Atlanta, and you see this flag that's represented here on the back of the CSS Atlanta. They have the real flag that actually flew aboard the CSS Atlanta, and it's hanging right here on the wall. That's it. That flag flew on board that ship during the Civil War. The jacket and the blood-stained vest of U.S. Navy Surgeon John T. Luck. He was assigned to the USS Ottawa out of Charleston, South Carolina during the Civil War, and he had to perform surgeries, and his vest and jacket are both covered in blood. Here is a model of the CSS Virginia, which is an ironclad. This is the USS Monitor, undoubtedly America's first stealth boat. This thing, look how small and thin it is. It would barely stick out of the water. In fact, this round cylinder tank here in the middle is the only thing that would stick out of the water besides the top layer of the ship. They don't have the entire ship, but that is the actual round cylinder tank from the USS Monitor that would stick out of the water like this. There it is there. And it would look just like that. You see the cannon sticking out of the hole. The soldiers would stand at the top with their spy glasses to look out. Look at this mock ship here with cannons hanging out of it. It even has the winches here so they could load and unload. This is an actual lifeboat from the USS Hartford. This was a Civil War torpedo. It's cool. It looks like a keg of beer, but it's explosive. Now this is the USS Hartford. We're gonna go in and see what's inside of here. And here is a depiction of what it would be like if you're actually on board the Hartford. I can tell you just from over here that this is going to be an awesome room. Look at this. There's an actual ironclad built, and this is supposed to represent a port where they would get supplies from that we're standing on now. Here's Johnson's Tobacco and Cotton Warehouse and Shipping. Plymouth Beds and Bar, so you could come here and it's like a hotel. This is supposed to represent water too, by the way. Yeah, this is the CSS Albemarle. You see that smokestack there, based out of North Carolina. We're gonna see what life was like on the inside of the Albemarle. Whoa, look at that cannon there sticking right out the front. So you see this giant cannon here that's sticking out the front. You can see the track that leads all the way back. Was because that cannon was so large and it had such a heavy recoil that it would come all the way back to the back here. They could also, you can also see the system of pulleys where they would pull it back up, but they could also pull the cannon back and rotate it around this track, and they had a location to fire from here. Of course it's not here because we're not, this is only half a model, but there would be a location over there, so they could position this cannon 3 different ways and fire any direction they needed to. So the giant ship that was outside is actually a full-scale reproduction of the Water Witch. Now the last hurricane that came through, they said they don't want anybody out here viewing the Water Witch because it's unsafe, but Tony and I were able to talk to the clerk and get special permission. He disabled the alarm for us and gave us permission to come out here to record it. I'm hearing some creaking coming from the wood. Don't sound very good. This is a full-scale model reproduction of the USS or CSS Water Witch, which we just saw inside. These cannons sitting over here on the ground are the actual cannons that were on board the Water Witch that were recovered. The Water Witch was piloted by a guy named Moses Dallas, if you didn't know, who is famous because he was credited as being the greatest pilot in the Confederate fleet. It's in bad shape. You can see that it does have damage, as he said, but they spent a lot of time building this thing. You can see the Water Witch there in the background. This was a great museum. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Getting to see the remains of those 2 old Confederate ships was awesome. Tony has to get back to South Carolina and I've got to get back to Alabama. So that's gonna do it for today. I want to thank you all for watching. Check out Tony's channel, and if you like Tony's channel, maybe throw him a like. Tell him that I sent you if you do happen to go over there. I will see you all tomorrow. I hope you have a great night.
Good morning, sun.